No fancy intro, we're talking about Crab Champions today. Crab Champions has gone through several updates since I last talked about it. I didn't really play it much in between the time that I last did my two videos and now, and when I saw that there was a couple big updates that came to the game over the span of the last few months, I decided to pick it back up and try it again with some friends and in solo, of course. Let's start by first talking about one of the bigger changes, the difficulty. There is a really interesting changes going on that I think it had been talked about for a while, and that is the fact that there are now difficulty multipliers you can add on to your runs to make things a little harder. So if Nightmare isn't hard enough for you, you can make it even worse. Now, of course, this extra challenge doesn't come with a little bit of an extra payoff, even if it's mainly just for show. When you complete higher challenge ranked runs, you can get these special medals that represent, you know, how high of a challenge rating you went. And this is per weapon though, so you kind of have to get these rankings per weapon, and then it kind of takes your overall ranking over all of your weapons to give you your main difficulty rating medal, which is kind of neat. I kind of like the fact that, you know, in order to raise your rating overall, you kind of have to disperse yourself and maybe try out some weapons you wouldn't normally use if you want to show off that, yes, I am absolutely insane, and push to the highest difficulty runs to other players. Now, adding even more onto the difficulty, this most recent update, not the same update as whenever these difficulty modifiers were first added, but in this newest update, they've now added an even higher difficulty mode that you only get by getting Diamond, the highest rating you can get on every single weapon. You have to get Diamond on every single weapon, and then you get this final hardest difficulty, and it is nuts. I've seen some people already do some runs on it, and it's absolutely terrifying. I don't know if I'll ever make it to that. I'm not nearly that dedicated to the game to go that far, but who knows? We'll see. Maybe I'll push myself to the challenge, but it's just insane how these last two updates have really spiked up difficulty, but also allowing you to really tune the difficulty to whatever you want, which is really nice. Speaking of that newest update that literally just came out only about a week or so ago, I think, is a huge overhaul to the visuals. You might have noticed in these clips that I'm showing that the visuals have really had a step up. For one thing, perks have these new 3D models that go to them. So for anything that's damage or, you know, shot modifiers or anything like that, it's going to have like a much nicer, more, you know, refined, profound, like bullet model. And then for like grenade mods, it pretty much stayed the same. But what you're gonna find is for elemental stuff, they're just really stand out. You can really tell what a modifier is going to be from a glance, which was something that was actually, now that I think about it, was kind of a problem before. If there were times where you would have, you know, let's say you had the perk that would allow for some perks to drop randomly when enemies would die, you would have to go right up to them to see what they were. Now I can just see it from a glance exactly what it is and already have made my decision whether I'm going to want it or whether I'm going to end up trashing it. I wouldn't say this goes for every redesigned perk quite yet. I'm sure there's still tons more to do in terms of really diversifying how all these perks look. This is only just the start. This game is still in early access, by the way. Another addition in this most recent update, 2 new weapons. The Arcane Staff, I believe is what it's called, and the Flamethrower. The Flamethrower, by the way, is now my new personal favorite weapon. Let's start with the Arcane Staff. The Arcane Staff is actually a pretty decent weapon. It's not necessarily my favorite in the game by any means, but it's a weapon that boasts a really solid amount of damage early on, with a decent rate of fire. However, the trade-off of that is that it only has a magazine size of 8. Also, while that decent amount of damage is really good for the early game, you're gonna have to make sure that you're getting a ton of perks that boost your damage output for this thing, because in the later game, if you're not making sure you're getting a bunch of damage boosting, it's not going to do that well. Flamethrower, on the other hand, is great for the early game and fantastic for the late game, assuming you're getting good perks for it. It's a really awesome gun that shoots around fire, leaves fire on the ground for enemies to walk through, so it's really good with large hordes of enemies. And the range on this thing, holy cow! You wouldn't think that a flamethrower would have the range that this weapon has, but goodness does it have a lot of range. And of course this weapon opens you up for some insane builds that will just melt down enemies and melt down bosses even more so. This weapon is just such a good all-arounder. It's good for massive hordes of enemies. It's good for bosses. It's good for just... It has the range to keep yourself distance as much as you would like. Well, not nearly as much as you would like. There is obviously a, you know, a point where the range stops. But for this game and how, you know, you kind of want to distance yourself but not distance yourself, like, too much, it's a really perfect middle ground. Another aspect of these past few updates that I probably should also mention is that there's been a pretty big change to melee perks. There's a whole lot more melee-focused perks now, which, I mean, like, that's great for people that want to focus on having their melee be an important part in their builds. Like, that's awesome. But for me personally, it didn't really make too big a difference because I never use melee in this game. I love to keep myself, you know, a good distance from enemies. I don't really like being up close and personal and getting a lot of melee hits in. For some people, they love that. It's part of their build. That's great, and I'm glad that there are a lot more perks in the game now to focus on that. But for me, not really a huge change, but I still felt it should be mentioned because I think that was actually the focus of an entire update. Another really big thing that came along with these updates was a lot of balance changing. There's been a lot of balance changing to different aspects of the games, and there's a very long list of all the changes that have gone on these last few updates, especially this most recent one. Also, you know, plenty of bug fixes and all that kind of stuff. A lot of, like, you know, there's probably been a lot of under the hood stuff that's just been going on to make the game a much better experience. So the core gameplay loop really hasn't changed, and honestly, it's kind of something where I kind of come back to every once in a while just to have a good time with some friends, but there's still not really much in the game for me that's going to keep me playing consistently. Like I said, this is a really fun game, but kind of as a distraction from other things. Like, this is a good game where I'm just like, hey, I want to do something with friends, and this is a game that we'll come to sometimes. It's really fun. The core gameplay loop, I think there needs to be some other type of modes. Like, for example, the parkour parts, that's a really fun thing. I think the parkour in this game, if it would be really fun to expand upon that, would be really, really cool to see. I'd also like to see a sandbox mode. Just being able to throw really whatever I want into a map and kind of just play around with builds and stuff like that. That would be so much fun. Having that be multiplayer as well, of course, would be a really good feature to have. Overall, I think these have been some really good updates to really diversify things, especially with all of the difficulty modifiers and the fact that there are 2 new weapons. There's been tons of changes to the perks. There's been completely new perks added. It's really just become a much better looking game, and also I feel like a much more customizable. I still highly recommend the game, especially if you're going to be playing it with friends. I'd say go ahead, buy it. If you're not hooked on this game in the first 2 hours, you're probably not really even gonna like it. Maybe with friends, but like I said, if the first 2 hours doesn't make you like it, you know, refund it within that time frame. Again, Steam allows you to refund within 2 hours of playtime, or within this 2 weeks that you've owned it, assuming that you're still within those 2 hours of playtime. This has been a Crab Champions video. I'm going to wrap things up here. Again, go check out the game for yourself. I think that if you're a fan of roguelites, if you're a fan of shooters, and you're a fan of, well, looters, I think you're really going to enjoy this. Per usual, a video that I, you know, said I was going to have done within a couple weeks has been more than a couple weeks. The Drakengard videos. The first one will be out, hopefully, by the end of the year. Right now I'm playing through Drakengard 1 for footage, and yeah, I'm slowly making my way through it, but that first video will probably be sometime within, you know, now till December, so we'll see when that happens. But anyways, this has been a video. I hope you're all having a good day, night, whatever. Josh out. See you in the next one.